Welcome to the next installment of our Courageous Conversations series, Reimagining Race and Education. I'm Sara Lomax-Reese, and I'm the president and CEO of WURD Radio. And we are doing this series, Courageous Conversations, in partnership with WHYY and the Philadelphia Media Network. And we've got Mike Days here, wave, from the Philadelphia Media Network, and Sandy Clark, who you'll meet in a second, from WHYY. And we're really excited, and thank you all so much for coming. This is a very, very important and timely conversation that we're gonna have tonight. And the theme of Courageous Conversations is really an opportunity to bring diverse communities together. You know, WURD is an African-American talk radio station. WHYY is our public radio station. PMN is the Philadelphia Inquirer Daily News, and Philly.com. And so we represent very different audiences, and so our partnership is an opportunity to bring these audiences together. And so this particular event is situated in this community because we all saw the video that happened in May at Cheltenham High School. My son was a senior at Cheltenham High School. I have two sons who graduated from Cheltenham High School, and you know, it was a very jarring moment, and it did not represent my experience and my kids' experience at Cheltenham. And so we know that there's a lot of you know, a lot of shifts and evolution that's happening in this community, and it is playing out in the school system. And so we're looking forward to having a great conversation with a diverse array of speakers. And I just want to really thank Pastor Waller and the team at Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church for hosting us and being so gracious to allow us to situate this conversation here at Enon, which is an amazing community. So thank you very much, Pastor Waller. And I just want to give Frances Jones a shout out because she is like tireless. She makes all the nitty-gritty stuff come together, so I really appreciate that. We also, we are doing this event in partnership with WURD's speaker series that's called the Walter P. Lomax Jr. MD Speaker Series, which is named for my father. And so we have sponsors of that series that I want to thank as well. Universal Companies, Pico, Comcast, NBC10, Telemundo, and Brown ShopRite generously contributed the refreshments that are out there that hopefully you were able to partake in. There are going to be some video testimonials out front, so if you are so moved, please, they're being recorded by WHYY, and they will air, I guess, on the digital platform, so please make your way out there and share your perspectives. We want to have lots of audience engagement tonight, so we have our panel in the pulpit, and we have other experts, students, teachers, and other folks in this first row. And we also have a lot of people who we know have a lot to share in the audience. So we're going to make lots of room and time for audience engagement in addition to our audience panel and our panel in the front. We have several hashtags. So if you can really communicate through social media, these are our hashtags. Hashtag on WURD, W-U-R-D, on O-N-W-U-R-D, WURD Radio, W-U-R-D Radio, WURD Speaks, and Race EDU as in education. So you can use any of those hashtags to follow and participate in the conversation. And I just want to make an announcement of an event that's happening at Enon. On October 7th, there's the Human Trafficking Awareness 5K Walk Run. So there's, I'm sure, more information about that out front. So with that, I'm going to once again thank you all for being here and welcome Sandy Clark from WHYY, and she's going to take it away from here. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. The great thing about following Sara is they don't have to move the mic for me, so the shorties can support each other. So good evening. I'm Sandra Clark. I'm WHYY's Vice President for News and Civic Dialogue. And I want to join Sara and Michael Days from Philadelphia Media Network in welcoming all of you. And again, extending our thanks to Pastor Waller for opening up the church for this important conversation. As Sara said, we started Courageous Conversations in May, understanding that, we are at yet another critical time. Many of these issues of race have never gone away, and they surface at some of the worst moments. I also live in Cheltenham. My daughter graduated from Cheltenham High School, and I take great pride in being in this community, and at the same time, I'm also invested in making sure that somehow we can come together to solve our problems and to support each other. And this really starts with courageous conversations, not just in what we speak, but also in how we listen. As your home for public media, WHYY offers events designed to engage the region around issues that you all care about the most. And talking about race in this country has never been easy. But we know that these unresolved issues come to the forefront and create discord and division among us. And then sometimes it just stays and sits, and paralysis sets in, and we don't quite know where to begin. So this conversation is one of those moments where we want to just take some steps forward. Our intention is not to solve every problem. We know we can't. But sitting here looking at each other and coming together is a beginning. These challenges bring with them a real opportunity for dialogue that can pave the way for greater awareness, consideration, and change. And this, by the way, will not be our last conversation. There's cards I think we distributed, or cards out front. We would like to know after this conversation, what else do you want to talk about? What was left unsaid? What might be the next courageous conversation? So please, we would like your feedback. So without further delay, we are honored to have an esteemed panel to help guide us through this discussion on race and education. Our moderator this evening is Dr. Howard Stevenson, the Constance Clayton Professor of Urban Education and Professor of Africana Studies in the Graduate School of Education at the University of Pennsylvania. And he's also director of the Racial Empowerment Collaborative at Penn, designed to promote racial literacy in education, health, and justice institutions. And he's also, by the way, nationally recognized clinical psychologist and a researcher on negotiating racial conflicts. Next to Dr. Stevenson is Sara Goldrick-Rab. She's the professor of higher education policy and sociology at Temple University and founder of the Wisconsin Hope Lab, the nation's only translational research laboratory seeking ways to make college more affordable. She's best known for her innovative research on food and housing insecurity in higher education, and she led two of the largest national studies on the subject for her work in public higher education and making public higher education free. Did I get that right, Sara? Sorry about that. Welcome, Sara. Let's see, Kristen. Next to Sara is Kristen Graham. Kristen covers urban education for the Philadelphia Inquirer, Daily News, and Philly.com, known now as Philadelphia Media Network, and her focus is on the school district of Philadelphia. She's covered city schools for nearly a decade and is part of a team that won the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service in 2012 for a series on school violence. And Kristen grew up in Philadelphia and attended public schools for 13 years. We have Otis Hackney. Otis currently serves as the City of Philadelphia's Chief Education Officer, and he was appointed by Mayor Kenny. He began his career as a mathematics teacher at Germantown High School, and after teaching and serving as an administrator in various schools, Mr. Hackney returned to South Philadelphia High School in 2010 as principal, where he successfully helped heal divisions after high-profile instances of racially motivated school violence. Welcome. And then we have Cheryl McFadden. Cheryl McFadden is a teacher at A. Randolph Career and Technical High School, returning to the classroom just this year after serving as a curriculum content specialist and career integration specialist in the Office of Career and Technical Education for the School District of Philadelphia. She is actively involved in promoting and sustaining the Prime Movers Media Clubs, a journalism program for students in urban high schools founded by esteemed journalists, one of my mentors, Asa Moore, and Dorothy Gill. And I forgot Dr. Marseille. Well, how did that happen? Dr. Marseille, welcome. Dr. Marseille is superintendent of the Cheltenham School District, and he's been superintendent since 2015, previously at Lower Merion. A lifelong educator, he's been a teacher, assistant principal, and director of secondary education, and he became superintendent in 2015. Welcome, Dr. Marseille, and my apologies. I can't see that far up, sorry. And finally, we have Reverend Dr. Alyn Waller, who's the senior pastor of Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church. Under Reverend Waller, Enon has taken an active role in education outreach and advocacy, hosting town halls, establishing the Enon Coulter Community Development Corporation, which provides education and development services to children and families. Assisting in the church also has assisted in development of Germantown High School Library and supported the music program at Martin Luther King High School. Thank you, Pastor Waller. And finally, as Michael just reminded me, because we only get one mistake up here, I want to introduce Solomon Jones. Solomon's our co-moderator for this evening. Solomon is the host of WURD's Wake Up with WURD. Wake Up with WURD. I wake up with WURD every morning. I don't know how I missed that. Solomon also is a blogger for WHYY, for the Philadelphia Experiment, and he also is a columnist for Philadelphia Media Network. So we all share Solomon. And Solomon will be co-moderating and sitting with some invited guests this evening. So thank you all for being here. We look forward to a fruitful conversation, and let's get on with the program. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? There you go.
It's already.
Good?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everybody. It's exciting to be here on this particular topic to talk very directly about reimagining race and education. And I think across the country today, everybody, parents, children around the country are worried about every day, what are they going to find themselves confronted by when they watch television, they turn on the news. Is there something strange and different that's going to haunt them? And I can think of no more important issue than education for us to be talking about tonight. And I can think of no other place to be than in this particular tabernacle, where we have in no other time, I think, needed to be ponderous, to be thinking about the future, to be praying, and to be on our knees about what should we be doing about the future, not only for ourselves, but for our children. And so we're delighted to have a conversation tonight with our panelists on the future of education. And there are a host of issues that are occurring today, which our panelists are prepared to talk about, on both panels. And before we get to the future, what we'd like to start to begin to think about, what are some of the current issues, briefly, that our panelists could speak to as the top, say, 3 or so challenges that they see facing education and race today. And any of our panelists can answer this. There have been some questions around issues of resegregation. Over the last 10 to 20 years, there's been a retrenchment on our views and values about integration in our society. Some have even asked the question, were our schools ever integrated? There are current issues around population changes that in predominantly white communities that are turning into predominantly black communities or black and brown communities, that those changes have caused shifts in how we educate and how we think about the young people in our schools. There are questions about to what degree our educational system is attending to issues of difference and diversity, that issues of implicit bias, that unconsciously we might treat some people different than others, and how that creeps into our educational leaders and teachers. And so these are a host, or just a few of the issues that some might talk about, but I'm going to direct to any of my panelists, perhaps starting with anyone who wishes to ask any of those questions. What would you say are 1 or 2 or the top 3 challenges facing these issues of race and education today. Who would like to begin? Dr. Marseille?
I can start.
Thank
That's
you.
okay. Thank you, Dr. Stevenson. Well, I think there's, put me in a corner in terms of identifying one or two. There's a lot to discuss. But I think for me, 63 years ago, with respects to the desegregation of schools, I think that's a big challenge for us, because I think even going back to 1954, we are seeing more of our schools segregated now than they've been in its history. And I think that segregation happens both structurally, in terms of zip code, and it also happens programmatically, in terms of what happens in schools and the way in which we segregate students by a number of factors, whether it be academic, whether it be social behavior or access. So I think it's a big challenge for us in terms of integration. What does that really mean within the school system? And does that create equity for all? I think the second challenge, which is why we're here, is what Dr. Johnson from University of North Carolina talks about in his work around the browning of America. And how do we as a larger community come to grips with the cultural and racial shifts that are happening in our communities, that inevitably will happen in all of our communities, and there's no one immune to that. So that's a big challenge in terms of coming to understanding about who we really are as a community, and what we understand about ourselves, and how we welcome others. And I think the other for me is, with that comes how do we in a diverse community meet the needs of the diverse students coming into our district, and the needs of the parents who are coming into our district. So I would have to say that the integration, the quote-unquote browning of America in terms of diversity, and the needs of students coming into our communities, and how our educators better prepared to support that.
Thank you, Dr. Marseille. Mr. Hackney?
Good evening, everyone. To give a little background, spring break, my family and I, we take a trip every year. This year, we were fortunate enough to go to Amsterdam. And when we were in Amsterdam, my wife, my daughter, we go to a museum, and they have an exhibit on apartheid. And those of you that are familiar with apartheid and think about South Africa, the Dutch were pretty much the architects of apartheid in South Africa. And there was a quote that stopped me. So I'm on spring break, I'm having a great time, and there was a quote on the wall by one of the architects of apartheid that said, "The blacks should never see the greener pastures of education." And it stopped me in my tracks. I mean, I'm on vacation, I'm having a great time, and I see this, and my wife knew that I was done. I was done for the rest of the day. Like, I had to stop. I was texting people and talking. I just said, I just saw the scariest thing that I've ever seen in my life. And here I am, an educator, chief education officer of the city of Philadelphia in another country, and saying, this is the same stuff that we still tackling right now. And so when we talk about issues that impact our people, and we look at what's going on with the lack of funding, especially in our neediest communities, which sadly are filled with most people that are black and brown. And thankfully today we got a decision from the state Supreme Court that opens the door to hear a trial about funding, because that we know it's not equitable. We know what the resources are that our children need to be successful, but yet it still doesn't happen. So what are the things that are in place systemically that negatively impact education and the resources that our children are supposed to deserve? Is it, based on something that I saw on a quote scribed on the wall from apartheid South Africa, but still impacts how people in Harrisburg may make decisions about how funding should be for children that need the most, so that way we can overcome our challenges through education. And so when I think about those issues, how do we undo that? How do we make sure that that scenario, that situation, it comes to an end? And how do we make sure that the funding, once it is, hopefully, you know, if we're successful and they make the decisions that they should make in terms of funding, that we use it appropriately so that way we can actually create better educational opportunities for young people?
Okay, Ms. McFadden. Yes.
Hi. As a classroom teacher for the past 13 years, working with high school students is where I started and where I continue to practice. I find that our biggest challenge is funding and resources. So after K-8, the focus is to ensure that children are prepared for high school. However, it becomes an ellipsis once they get through the high school door. It becomes a ... So now you're in high school with no resources, no IMC, sometimes no gym teacher, no gym, no electives or very few electives. And then we wonder why the children are downtown creating mayhem. So it really has to be a conversation with parents leading the charge that they want more. They want more for their students. And I'm not putting the blame on parents. I'm also going to talk about cultural competencies. Because again, just as we have the flight, the reverse flight, going into the city and going into the suburbs, we also need to understand cultural competencies. It's a difference between cultural diversity professional development and cultural competency professional development. And we really need, because once you understand what competencies are necessary to teach the children, you will then begin to reach the children because you understand their need, you understand their walk. And I fight. When I was in the office of CTE, I fought with my executive director all the time to ensure that when we did professional development, it was meaningful and relevant, because a majority of our teachers are white or Caucasians. The majority of our students are African American and brown and Latino. And there's such a big disconnect. And it's the bias, and it's the perception, and it's the stereotypes, and it's the lack of conversation, a real conversation. You know, having to get to know the student. Having a student tell you they want their reading score to be higher by the end of the year. They want to be able to read more books, but you don't have a library in your school. And then and then I'm gonna get off. Then I have to beg for books, and I'm gonna beg for some books for my students. However, why should I have to constantly beg for books when we live in a world-class city? You know, I heard today we only have 6 librarians left. In 2010, we had 63. So in 7 years, we're down to 6. We should be scared. Not scared, we should be mad. Our kids do not deserve to be in a school without books, with librarians, without IMCs, without makerspace, without the tools they need to be successful and to be able to compete across the nation.
Thank you, Ms. McFadden. Thank you. Dr. Goldrick-Rab.
Well, I appreciate the discussion of the children, because that's where I think we need to start when we think about these issues. I'm actually really thrilled to see that we have a number of young people in the room today. And I think when you think about how we understand the problem, we need to think about how those young people are being portrayed. When we talk about the, quote, gaps that we see in performance, it's usually that we're questioning the strength and talent of those young people. But what I see across this city are tremendous communities of strength who are being met with very poor resources. There's a mismatch between the drive and the ambition and the need for education and what's being allocated. And I think that the disparities that we see in funding are not actually the driver, they're the symptom of the problem. The problem is why we believe anyone should be able to get away with those very different allocation of resources. And at the heart of that conversation is what's eating at this country, which is an unwillingness in some communities to take care of other people's children, and a misunderstanding about how community thrives and how democracy is built. What worries me so much in this city is that we see so many strong, talented young people who know that they need a lot of education these days to survive in a very turbulent world. And not only are our elementary and secondary schools being under-resourced and systematically under-resourced, but on the higher education side, we're going to meet them with an incredibly inequitable system as well. And what that does when they find that out is it really begins to put a lot of their hopes and expectations to rest. They come back home having left college in debt with no degree, having tried all that time to climb a mountain they were never going to be able to get up because some people never wanted them to get up. And it's why, the question is the why that's allowed to happen, and it's been allowed to happen for literally hundreds of years in this country.
Thank you. Either Pastor Waller or Kristen Graham, either one.
First of all, I want to say thank you for having this conversation, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of the conversation. I think I'm simply going to be an echo, because I think we all know what the challenges are. First and foremost, funding. Public education works if you fund it. And if you underfund it, it doesn't matter what pedagogical approaches you take, they won't work unless you fund it correctly. And so rethinking and reimagining how we fund education is number one priority. And then secondly, making sure that we as adults have real, honest, truthful conversation in our public discourse. And as we're talking about the problems, as we're talking to each other, making sure that we're telling the truth without getting overly political. One of the arguments for the election of Donald Trump is that he was an authentic voice, in that in a sea of voices that don't answer questions, that don't speak the truth, here is someone who came with crazy truth, but he speaks what's actually on his mind. And it has been said that a self is more attractive than a pseudo-self. And in a conversation where many of us don't tell each other the truth, where we have become so politically correct that we are no longer having engaging conversations, truth is not being told and we're not getting at real answers. And so number one, funding. Number two, our socialization of how we as adults talk with each other. And I don't think I'd be doing my job if I didn't suggest that while we believe in a separation of church and state, we are removing the faith conversation from public discourse. And when we no longer are comfortable with faith conversations as a part of the development of our children, we're going to be in trouble when we're trying to cross over barriers, cultural barriers, racial barriers. We have to have proper funding. We have to have proper faith conversations. And so if I were speaking Baptist, I would say faith, fellowship, and funding is what we're going to need if we're going to be able to solve this problem.
Thank you, Pastor. Kristen Graham.
So briefly, I'll echo what my fellow panelists have said, that it really, the primary driver, the primary thing that we need to worry about is funding. And I reported on the Supreme Court decision today that is going to allow a landmark school funding case to go forward. And I'm thinking of what one of the parents, who was a plaintiff in the lawsuit, said to me in an interview today. Her daughters previously had attended a high-wealth school district in the area in Montgomery County, and she said they had everything they needed. They had ample technology, they had, arts and music in their schools, they had, extracurricular activities, lots of supports, and then The family moved to Delaware County, and the girls attend the William Penn School District. And she said, sometimes in the winter the rooms are cold and kids don't have textbooks to take home. And really, that's a very basic example, but that's what it comes down to. A lot of our kids don't have textbooks to take home, and think about what that means for them.
Thank you. We also have another panel, and I'm going to turn it over to Brother Solomon Jones, who of folks who could either add to what's been said or react to what's been said before we get to this conversation on reimagining.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Stevenson. And I am Solomon Jones from WURD Radio. And really, I heard everything that everyone said, and it was so much information. A couple of things jumped out at me. One was what Otis Hackney said he saw when he went to Amsterdam from the architects of apartheid, the statement that the blacks should never see the greener pastures of education. And I think that would have probably stopped me in my tracks too. But I wonder, because we've been talking about school and we've heard so many people talk about it, but I think the one voice that we really need to hear is the voice of a student. And so Tamir Harper is a student at Science Leadership Academy here in Philadelphia. And the question I have for you is this: have you ever felt like the people who run the schools don't care?
So thank you for allowing me to be here. Okay. My name is Tamir. I'm a senior at Science Leadership Academy and is the co-founder of a nonprofit called URBED that advocates for quality and efficient urban education here in Philadelphia. And to your question, in Philadelphia specifically, we have a school reform commission that can vote on whatever they please without answering up to anyone else. So the people that's running our schools and making decisions about our schools don't have anyone to answer up to, so they can make these decisions that can just do it and don't care about anything else. So we have leaders in place that are not asking for the voices and listening to the voices.
All right, so I'll take that as a yes. Okay, so then I guess the other question is this, because Pastor Waller talked about funding and fellowship and faith, and certainly all of those things are true. In Pennsylvania, we had the biggest funding gap of any state in the country, 33 percentage points between the richest and the poorest school districts. And so we do have a funding problem, and we also have a diversity issue. 86% of the kids in the schools, charter and regular public schools, are children of color. And so only 14% of the kids in our schools in Philadelphia are white. Between the funding issue and the fact that most of our children are children of color, and I'll ask you this, Sharif. Sharif El-Mekki is the principal of Mastery Shoemaker, a black male educator. Do you see those things contributing to what is happening with the schools?
Thank you. First of all, I triple score the funding issue. It's one of the most oppressive things that is tolerated and existent. If people really understood like that 33% gap, what that does to children every day. And there was a study done about a year or so ago. And what it said was, because initially this is my 25th year in schools, and I always assumed that the richer districts got more money and all poorer districts got less money. But that's not the case. The blacker your district is, the less money they get. Because you can find poverty in white areas in Pennsylvania, and they still get more money than black children. And so the inequity isn't just the rich gets richer, it's that the poor will continue to be oppressed if they are black. And so to be able to see that was just really disheartening. And I just whispered to Solomon, like, this time I'm glad that the Supreme Court is going to hear the case, because if you recall, this was up before the Supreme Court before, and they threw it out and said we have nothing to do with it, which basically means we don't care, and let the racist legislators continue to make the decisions. And then just as far as the teacher equity gap, when there's countless studies over and over and over again, it shows that black children, when we talk about this achievement gap, there are researchers who say it could be cut in half if there were more black educators. Black children get suspended less from black educators. Black children are referred to gifted and honors program at higher rates if they have black teachers. There was a recent study in Florida. They did it over the course of years. 3 million, and I'm gonna wrap it up, 3 million students, reading and math scores increased when they had black educators. This is study after study after study. 40% less dropout rate if they have black educators. And so this gap, there are many gaps that our children are suffering from. Teacher equity, funding, there are many.
Thanks, Sheree. And I'm glad you brought up those disparities in terms of discipline, because those disparities start in preschool, right? Black kids are suspended more in preschool than their white counterparts, and it just balloons as they go forward through high school and other grades. And of course, if a kid is suspended more than once, they're more likely to drop out of school. And so I want to ask you, Eric Shamari Grimes, Brother Shamari, what role do black educators play in improving what happens in our schools?
Greetings. I was told to act right, so I'm going to try to do that. So the good ones play the role that we all should be playing, and that is, I call it the hazmat hard hat. We know these institutions are racist, right? Form follows function. So the money piece, the finance piece is a form. The function is the maintenance of white supremacy, which requires its institutions to create opportunities for superiority for some and inferiority for others. The public education system is an inferiority producing machine for black children. We know that. Anybody in here who wants to act like you don't know that, you're lying to yourself. Stop lying in the church, because you might go to hell. So, our job, because we send our children into these places every day, unabated, unprotected, is to make sure, if we know the environment is toxic, at minimum, how do we make sure that they have the hard hat, the hazmat gear necessary to navigate without dying? That's the role of a good black teacher. It's also the role of good black people. And then if anybody else wants to join us in caring, you're welcome.
All right. So, thank you, Brother Shamari. Hillary Beard is a writer and one of my colleagues as a writer. And what I want to ask about, because this whole thing really started with black girls, right? Black girls had a fight at Cheltenham, and they were treated in a way that was probably a little different than their white counterparts would have been treated. I can say that because I had a daughter who went to Cheltenham and graduated from Cheltenham. But when you look at black girls, is there anything different or anything special or anything unique that we need to be doing in order to improve the educational experience and outcomes for our black girls?
Thank you for that question, and Brother Shamari, thank you for that setup as well. So I happen to be the co-author of a book, Promises Kept: Raising Black Boys to Succeed in School and in Life. If you are the parent of a black child, this book provides a cafeteria menu of strategies for how to raise your child today, given what they have to deal with as they go into school. So I want to make you aware of that. Educators, it's also important for you to check it out as well, Promises Kept. In terms of black girls, really I think a lot of the issues that face black girls are the same issues that face black children. I mean, many of them have already been spoken to, but then you also have the gender overlay as well in our society. But I wanted to take this discipline gap conversation someplace, because when we have unexamined not only the structural racism within education and the systemic racism within education, but when you have educators who have not been taught to teach across race or across gender or across socioeconomics, much less, we're having a conversation now about intersectionality, how people's different identities intersect. So not only do you not teach across race, you don't teach about across gender, you don't know how to teach across socioeconomics, you definitely don't know how to teach across the intersection of the three. And the United States right now is more segregated than apartheid South Africa. So we have teachers who don't have exposure to black children, including black girls. And so when you have a media, which Solomon, you and I work in, which disproportionately purveys inaccurate and overwhelmingly negative images of black children to people, so depending upon where you are, 70-some to 80-some% of the teachers of black children are white women who live in segregated communities. The research shows that the average white person has one white friend, so one black friend, and so they likely don't have real relationships with black people, so they're learning about black people through the media, which is disproportionately conveying negative images, so then fear comes into play, and when you have unexamined, no matter how good a person you are, the research shows that 89% of white people in this country and 50% of black people in this country have unconscious or implicit pro-white, anti-black bias. So even if you're a good white person, you have unconscious bias. And even if you're a black person who considers himself conscious, there's a good chance that you have unconscious bias against your own people. And so when that goes unexamined and you enter a classroom and the media is telling you to be afraid of a child, then when the child exhibits oftentimes an age-appropriate reaction because they're children, the adults interpret it through the lens of fear or through inaccurate and negative stereotypes and respond accordingly. And so research by Pedro Noguera and Gregory, they have a study, is the racial achievement gap, that it says the racial achievement gap and the racial discipline gap are two sides of the same coin. So these overall systemic and structural and institutional and individual issues around racism impact black girls as they impact black boys and other children of color.
All right, thank you, Hillary. And so many of our schools, for a while, went without counselors. We talked about the fact that the librarians have been decreased to almost nothing, went without custodians, went without all kinds of resources, went without nurses, went without music, went without sports. All of these things cut out because there was no money, or so we were told. And so, as someone who is a counselor, Gwen Ebron, what is your experience in dealing with children now who might not have had all of the resources that they should have had before they got to you?
Good evening, everyone. I call myself a soldier in an army, and I work at the Anderson School right now as a clinician. I am the person who takes care of the children who are what teachers call beyond the help of the school counselor, and I work with the STS program, which supplies, it's an outside agency from Northern Children's Services, which supplies counselors and behavioral health workers to work with children side by side. I have been in education, in social work, and in counseling for 31 years. And I can tell you the bottom line of the problem that I see across the board is low self-esteem. When you have high self-esteem, you make correct decisions. You might not be perfect, it might not always work, but you make better decisions. Our children have low self-esteem, and it's not just our children, but their parents and their parents' parents. Now, where does this come from? for so many years, our children have not had one essential thing that I feel is so necessary and can be easily done, and I'm saying easily done because now we have the internet, and that is tell our children who they are, and hopefully they will become who we hope they will be. There is very little to know. I'll say very little, and I say no because it's not in depth enough. History of African and African American history. Now, many might say, well, they do have African American history, yes, but most of those books and history comes and starts and says that we came from slaves. We who exist today came from slaves. And I tell everyone, and I've done this for over 21 years now in terms of my own business. If you don't remember anything that I say today, just remember that from Africa, because when you ask people, tell me something about Africa, well, they say slaves came from Africa. And I tell people slaves did not come from Africa. You had physicians, architects, engineers. You had learned people who were removing cataracts from eyes, who was doing cesarean sections, and all kinds of things, who were enslaved and then were brought to America. So one of the things that we need to do, and one of the things that I do in my counseling, I make sure I infuse African and African American history with my counseling. So if I have a child who is ADHD or ADD, meaning they can't sit still, I tell them about Henry Box Brown. And I tell them, let's do a Henry Box Brown, where I tell them the story, I tell them everything that Henry Box Brown did, and I hope everybody knows what I'm talking about, but if you don't, you can look it up on the internet. But Henry Box Brown really mailed himself to freedom. And when I tell them the story and I tell them what he did and what he did afterwards, and then we time it, I have a child that can sit still for a certain amount of time. So I infuse the history with my counseling. So what we basically need to start with, to raise the self-esteem, especially of our females and males, do teachers see the students as students with problems, or do they see them as kings and queens in training? And that's what I call my students. So that's just a little bit of what we do.
Thank you very much. Dr. Stevenson?
Thank you, Brother Jones. We've laid out quite a few thoughts about the problem, and there's even some solutions in what's been said. And just for the sake of moving to this other place, maybe it's too hard for us to move to a place of solutions, but that's what we're here for. And this moment describes for us why we need more than one conversation about this. But some of you know the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. But the question we're going to pose here is, what does it take to raise a healthy village? And in this context, around schooling, around education on behalf of our children, what would you say? And our goal is to get to this stage, to this panel, and then this panel, and then to the audience with questions. What would you say are some of the solutions that we can do for some of the problems many of you have mentioned already? And we're talking about race and education, not just education alone. Ms. McFadden.
Hi, this is Cheryl. So one of the things I think we need to do, we need to make the schools, particularly the high schools, more accessible to parents. So one of my biggest gripes is that when there are parent-teacher nights and report card conferences for high schools, we may get less than 1/3 of parents out. And part of that is because these conferences are scheduled at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I don't understand that. I do not understand that. They're at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and they're over at 3. We have to respect that parents work. And then we sit up there and complain that the parents don't even come out, but that's not true. I think if parents really went to Height and went down to Karen Lynch and all of them down 440 and said, hey, you want me to come check on my child, you want me to engage with the teachers, the principal, then tell me, why is this school having a report card conference from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock? I work from 9 to 6. I would be more than happy to get there by 7 or get there by whatever time. If I can get my employer to let me leave an hour or two, I am pretty sure that many parents would love to come talk to their students. I call parents every day. I have parents who are doing drive-bys, and it's only day 16. So no one can tell me that parents do not care. So I think as a village, we need to let whoever they are, the key holders or whatever, say, look, I need you to make it accessible to me. I can take care of my own land, but you need to make sure that I have a hoe and some dirt and some, I can take care of it. And I think, that's where it needs to start. We need parents to say enough.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hackney?
Thank you, Cheryl, because that sparked an idea in terms of when we think about it, it's great. We have to go to the leaders at the highest level, but we also have to go to our folks at, in the building level and in the classroom. So one example that I talk about is something when I was at South Philly, and we talk about parent conferences, and I can tell you, and even the pushback and the dynamic around it was South Philadelphia High School, 6 floors total if I include the basement where we have classes. City block long, huge building, huge building. And at the time when I was there, we had about 19 different languages spoken in the building. So one day I just got an epiphany for report card conferences, we're gonna move report card conferences to the gymnasium. All the teachers, you're gonna be down in the gymnasium, you're gonna sit by subject, because what I found was for our children, sometimes that caregiver could be grandmom or granddad, or they may not, and we had one elevator that kind of worked, and so they can't even get through the building. I also had parents, because I only had 1 or 2 BCAs for the different languages that I had, so they can't be on the 5th floor helping a family who's at the front door just trying to figure out where do I even go. So we put it in one room. It was the adults in the building that pushed back and were like, why are we doing this? Now the parents loved it, because they could just walk in one big room and hit all their teachers and talk to them all. Groups of teachers could talk to one parent at one time. And and I say that to highlight of just thinking out of the box. So we need our leaders at different levels to do that. Yes, we need to get the people in Harrisburg to figure that out. We need the people at 440, not to disparage anyone there, to figure it out, but also within our buildings themselves. So the leaders in these buildings just have to take control of these situations and not worry about people's feelings. Because I told my staff, I said, I don't care about your feelings on this one. I said, this is parent-centered. The parents loved it. Just the parents that couldn't tell me in English were telling me, and they're like, thank you very much. Because the BCA could now walk with them to each class. Grandmom could see all the teachers and didn't have to walk from one end. Because like I said, I had an elevator. It was one at one end of the building. So even if you could get to it, you almost had to, you could walk that building, you could walk blocks in that building on a back to school night. And so when we talk about creating access and we talk about how do we make things easier for our parents so that way they feel comfortable, those are the things. And so you have to challenge the leaders at the building level too, at the classroom level, to do things differently if you want to see different outcomes.
I think Pastor Waller and then Kristen.
I think one of the solutions is rethinking and reimagining how this institution is in partnership. You said how it takes a whole village to raise a child. Well, how do you take a village, or how do you raise a village? When we say that here at Enon, we say it takes a whole village to raise a child, but it takes a church to raise a village. And we need to think through how we participate or have creative programming with the church. The reason that I was able to grow up in a, much like Cheltenham, suburb with all of the messages, the racy-facing messages that came at me at Shaker Heights, Ohio, is because I had an institution like this, a prophetic institution to go to help correct some of the messages that were happening in my life. Even today, I think some of the discussions of how do we get parents to the table Some of the same parents that won't show up at anything else will show up at this church. Some of the same meetings that you think they won't come to schools for, they'll come in the church. At Martin Luther King High School right now, there is a program alongside of Enon where the music teacher who actually works for the school district and gets paid by Enon, creative programming, rethinking, reimagining how we do this together. And that's what I meant from the beginning. I think that we've gotten so afraid of truthful conversation, even faith conversation, and we make the assumption that the two can't go together. We're in a sanctuary tonight. Nobody has put oil on you yet. We haven't had to pray yet. We haven't proselytized anyone, but it just makes sense that we're here. And it makes sense that we can have a conversation without fear that anybody's soteriological convictions are going to be trampled on. So I think one answer is to reimagine and allow the church to be a part of the community again.
Okay, Kristen Graham.
I have two thoughts, and one is really simple and preaching to the choir, because since you're all here, you all care about education. We really need to lift our educators up. I mean, it's a profession that, traditionally was very respected, and I think in the last, several years teachers have taken a lot of hits. And so as a society, we really need to value our educators. Whenever I interview one, I typically say, I think you guys do the hardest and most important job there is. And it sounds like a line because I'm a reporter, so I want to get them to talk, but I really mean it. And I know you guys know that too, but we need to figure out how to convince others of that. And the other thing is, we really need to care about kids' social and emotional learning. Vaux High School in North Philadelphia was closed for several years, and of course, just reopened up with a partnership between the Philadelphia Housing Authority and the school district, and Big Picture, a nonprofit. And they have extra money. The PHA invested millions into the building and into the work they're doing there, and a lot of the extra money went to social and emotional learning for those kids. The school has resilience specialists, kind of school social workers. They're going to have counselors, and they just care about the kids in that way, because how can we expect kids to do well in reading and math if they have seen trauma, if they have issues that are unresolved? So that's really important.
Thank you very much, Kristen Grant. Dr. Marseille.
Thank you. I think a lot on the list, but I want to say this, is I think the other panel, who thank you for your comments. And I think reimagining schools, first for me, has to be the fact that we have to stop criminalizing behavior. K through 12. And what I mean by criminalizing behavior is the way in which we process behaviors very differently for students of color. And it's unequivocal. I know some people have a very hard time digesting that. And they have that challenge because they're not ready yet to turn their mirror the other way. They're just not ready yet. They're going to get there. But if you are criminalizing behavior disproportionately, and students are being removed from their learning experience, and being removed not only from the classroom, but removed from the school setting, what exactly are you perpetuating? And then you understand, well, what is the issue about the gap? Not just academically, but social-emotionally. What is the story you are telling that particular student? And I've said this before, and when I was here during service at Enon and had the pleasure of speaking, I see Reverend Marshall over there, and I said that if you keep painting a single story of a particular group over and over again, that is what they become. And the challenge I have is that they'll understand there was a pivotal moment where an incident occurred in the school district that I'm the superintendent, but also the school district that my daughter is in. right? That I believe in so much that we moved and said, you're going to go to school in Cheltenham because I believe in that, is that that's a single story. But if we keep painting students of color as extremely violent and scaring people, then that's exactly what they become, and that's how people perpetuate that. So for me, reimagining is the idea, how do we think differently about the way we process? And one of my colleagues said on the panel here, said that there are oftentimes an unwillingness to take care of other people's children. And if you saw them as your own, and if I see children the way I see my daughter, I process information vastly differently. And that's the way I see that. And if I may, one more thing is, and it speaks to the work all of us are doing, and it speaks to your work, Dr. Stevenson, is the ideal around, and others in this audience, I saw Dr. Michael somewhere, is around this conversation around racial literacy and racial identity. I think that reimagining schools is that at the college level, we need to significantly change the way we prepare teachers to address students that don't look like them and don't live in their same communities, so they can be prepared to do that. So professional development for me is extremely important. And then school systems need to make that not optional, not on a laundry list of today's professional development, here are 13 things you can choose to go to between 10:30 and 11:45. And guess what oftentimes is not on the list where people say when you talk about cultural competency and race? They will choose anything else before that happens. So it's not an option, it is part of the work that we do, and I imagine a system where schools need to be very deliberate about the professional learning experience. And I'm not talking about just a 1-hour workshop. I'm talking about just not 1 year, 2017-18, and all of a sudden you become culturally proficient and you can move on your merry way. I'm talking about consistently the fabric of what we do should be embedded in cultural competency and racial literacy and identity.
Dr. Goldrick-Rab.
Well, I want to pick up on what you just said about higher education. And I agree, I think, absolutely. I sit in a college of education that produces a lot of the city's teachers. I think that we actually need to do even more than even change only how we prepare the teachers, but everyone who works in our schools and at all levels. So I've been charged most recently, and this is the first time in my career that I've been doing this, with training up the student affairs professionals who greet your children when they get to college. Right? The professor in the classroom is only one of many people who will interact with that person as they walk through the door, and the rest of the folks around them are the ones who are supposed to be advising them, supporting them, etc. But for a very long time, we have framed college as a place where you are very much on your own. Your parents are supposed to basically let you go, send you off, and you are really supposed to bootstrap your way through the next 4, what is really now 6 years. And that fails a lot of people because the system isn't set up to catch you if anything should happen. So what we've started talking to these folks about is how do you create a culture of care in that space? And I'll give you an example. If you care if your student succeeds, then on the syllabus you don't just list the readings, the attendance expectations, and the disciplinary policies if you don't show up for class. You also indicate that if a student doesn't have enough food to eat or a safe place to sleep, where they are to go for those resources, and an indication that you yourself would like to know about that. Okay? That's a completely new way to talk to people about how we're going to do college. What works about it is it will work for every student. And if we can acknowledge that the wealthiest students have all of those things, they have a parent to call, frankly 4 or 5 people in their lives who can provide those resources and that net. And all we're doing is trying to ensure that it's universally designed for every student. If we can put those things into place, then we will see more people who do rise to that level and can get onto college actually succeed. They will be able to become the professionals who go back into the community and work, and frankly, they also will hopefully not be saddled with debt when they do so.
Thank you. Stage panelists. One quick one. Go.
I just want to add something real quick to that whole culture of care. And it reminds me of a quote that I keep at my desk just to keep myself grounded. The quote is, "It is unfair to expect children to behave as adults."
Thank you. Okay. So thanks to our stage panelists. Back to you, Solomon, for reactions or thoughts to our audience.
All right, Dr. Stevenson, thank you very much, and I want to thank both panels. And right now, we want to go to questions from the general audience. And so we will ask you to begin to line up at these mics with your questions. You'll see mics in these two aisles. You haven't seen me. Let me turn around. So there's mics in these two aisles, one here, one here. You can line up with your questions for the panel and begin to ask those questions now. Go ahead, sir.
Is the mic on?
Please say your name, sir.
I don't think the mic is on. It's on now. My name is Craig Brown. I'm a member of Enon, also an educator, retired of 38 years. My wife taught for about 37 years. And I just want to say teaching was the greatest profession and the greatest joy I ever had, even above being a principal. I liked the classroom, I really did. But I just like to just remind us of something. All of us in here are teachers. There are some of us that are professional teachers, but the students are watching us. Parents, professional educators, every single day. So here's a couple of quotes that I blew up when I was a principal, so that as teachers came in, as the custodian came in, whoever came in to work, they saw these quotes. "If I accept you as you are, I will make you worse. However, if I treat you as though you are what you are capable of becoming, I help you become that." And a lot of educators know this one. Students will rise or fall to our level of expectations. And here's the one that really gets to my heart, a teacher's creed. "I have come to the frightening conclusion. I am the decisive element in the classroom." That's where the action is. The real action is in the classroom. The funding and all these other things, yes, we have to correct those, but the action of education is really between that teacher and 30 or whatever the number is now in that classroom. It is my personal approach that creates the climate. It is my daily mood that makes the weather. As a teacher, I possess tremendous power to make a child's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or humor, hurt or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated, a child humanized or dehumanized. Folks, we've got to teach our children. We've got to show them a better way. I agree with everything these panelists have said, but we've got to come to grips and we've got to do a better job. As all of us, as I said before, teachers, we've got to show them a better way. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I just want to, and please, give them some applause. I just want to ask if there are any parents here. There was supposed to be a parent on the panel. If there are any parents here, okay, go ahead, miss. And please, if you have a question, please ask the question. Our time is limited, so we want to kind of get through the questions first. Go ahead.
Okay, I am a parent. My son is a freshman at Science Leadership Academy at Bieber. My question actually had to do with what role you all think content plays in reimagining race in education. I always think of the miseducation of the Negro and how people sometimes talk about I have to kind of re-educate what I was taught, because sometimes what our kids are taught is not the history that they should learn. I always think of when African American history is taught, it's always worksheets, you know, And so I wanted to know if anyone had any thoughts on what role content plays and whether you all see any improvement in that.
Thank you. You know, when I had said earlier that when Dr. Stevenson mentioned one or two things, that was one of the things on my list, is if I could reimagine school or education, how do I create a system that allows students to see themselves in a positive light through the curriculum and instruction? So for me, part about the curriculum is not only what you teach, but how you teach it. And how are you depicting the image of brown people throughout that curriculum? So I think that part of the work around racial literacy and cultural competency, the sense of belonging, the social connection that I think the panel talked about, how do I see myself in school? How am I represented in the literature? And what does that mean to me is a pivotal part of the puzzle pieces that are needed. So I would reimagine a place where if I was a student, whether it was racial identity, it was gender identity, it was sexual identity, that I'd be able to see myself positively represented within not only the school system, but within the resources that we are using. Because that creates a socialization identity where if you're talking about Africa from a deficit model, then that's what you're going to see. If you're talking about a particular other set of issues and you see as a deficit, that's what you begin to live up to. So content for me is an extremely important role within that process. I know you had something.
I would say content, and once again, going back to teacher preparation. So the content can be there, but you have to make sure that you have a teacher that believes in it. Because when we talk about whether it be history, I was a math teacher, and so if you're talking about Pythagorean triples and you find out, and there were walls of them inside pyramids in Egypt that predated it by thousands of years. So it's like, Pythagorean triples, are you sure that someone else didn't figure those things out? And being able to talk to the children and bringing that energy and that brightness and that light to the contributions that they've made. So when just this week, the city finally dedicated, a statue on city property or a statue was erected for an African American. And everyone talks about how Cotto was removed from the history books. But there's another piece, or stories when you hear how many of our young black people know, our young students know about Black Wall Street. And every time that, when black folks have built up community and done everything that certain groups say that we don't do, it gets burned down to the ground because to put fear in our communities. So there are things that we have to teach our children to let them know to alleviate that fear, because I'll tell you right now, as a former principal, some of the things that just stopped your kids from learning is just fear. Our kids are scared. And how do people respond when they're scared? Some of them shut down, some of them get really aggressive, but they are scared. When you corner them, and corner them with love, and it comes out and you find out, you just scared of your own greatness, scared of the opportunity, scared of doing the work, scared of challenging yourself because you don't think that you're going to have the opportunities and supports. And then so if you have a building or a culture that doesn't support them, then it just highlights that and creates that energy, that toxic energy that now feeds into those stereotypes. And those are the things that when people do this stuff and don't understand the impact that the adults in the building, and I own part of that too. I was not perfect as a teacher. I made my mistakes, but I tried to learn from them along the way. But you create that environment. So if we want to really alleviate those things, the adults, kids are kids. And if they were perfect beings, they wouldn't need us. We have to create those spaces for them and how to teach them to challenge their fears and overcome their fears and not promote it.
Thank you, Ms. Hack.
Thank you.
Go for it.
All right, I just had two statement questions. One is that I think that the overall conversation is a healthy conversation, and yet it still makes certain people comfortable. And when I say that is if we paint education as the sole purpose that's keeping people from rising up the social economic scale, then that gives other people a sense of entitlement or a sense of feeling that, you know, this is why certain people aren't at a certain economic level because they aren't educated. And I wanted to highlight that there is a difference between being well educated and being intelligent. And then also I wanted to make sure that, yeah, I'm sorry. And my question was, sheesh. No, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, guys. But my question was, what are we doing as far as schools to promote different industries? Because I know in other cultures, in certain neighborhoods, not everybody has to be educated because they're introduced to so many different industries where they don't necessarily need a bachelor's degree, a master's degree in order to make a decent living. So what is our schools doing in order to create certain industry banks and industry pools so we can have options? That's for anybody.
So this is Cheryl. I'm so glad you asked that question. How many of you knew that the School District of Philadelphia has 41 programs of study that prepare students for jobs in industries? How many of you knew that? And they have a 3-year program. They walk away with certifications. They also have opportunities to articulate the credits if they do well on the occupational competency test. And unfortunately, we had to right size last year because we had empty seats. And they just spent a ton of money creating an advanced manufacturing plant. I want to say plant all the time, but it's not. Well, they did it inside Benjamin Franklin, and they had state-of-the-art everything. Unfortunately, it was under-enrolled. So the CTE programs actually could serve 12,000 students. We had a little over 6,800. I did that job for 7 years, and to the parent who was talking about content, I was the career integration, which meant that I was constantly working on content. But I say that to say this, the School District of Philadelphia definitely understands the need for college and career readiness. And the CTE program, we have reinvented vocational education. It's no longer a place for special ed students, even though some teachers still carry that poor stereotype that children and even some parents. I've heard some parents say that they didn't want their children to be in a career technical education program. However, career technical education programs sit in ENS, SLA, some of the magnet schools. We have a great program up in Northeast, so I guess it's location, location, location. However, Phillip Randolph graduated the only black female welder who works for SEPTA.
But can I get you into the local?
She is 19
401?
years old.
Like the Iron Workers 401, in order to get into that, and to get into those union jobs, takes sponsorship. So like at some point, like, you know, we have to acknowledge that, you know, we have to be certainly educated to a certain level, but that's not necessarily the case for everyone.
Well, thank you, sir.
So, as the city official person, an educator, first, let's not say that folks don't need, that everybody doesn't want to be educated or doesn't need to be educated to go into the workforce. It's just different forms of education. I tell folks that whether you're going on the college path, the career path, it's all an education because you need to be educated in the skills of carpentry. You are constantly gaining skills, acquiring skills. When I think about the school district, I know they had to lay off a plumbing instructor, and I'm like, wait a minute, we don't have any young folks that need to, like, we need young people to go into plumbing. We need them to go to college, we need them to go to be electricians, we need them to be plumbers. If we want them to be able to get into the iron workers trades or the plumbers or what, we have to make sure that we ask our young people and give them the opportunity to do so, but don't downgrade it and say, oh, well, you don't have to be educated, you can go here. Because that's a narrative that, once again, if we think about, we fought against that. Because remember, you know, you talk to my generation or maybe before where, you know, you were advised not to go to college. And we pushed back so hard on that as black people to say, no, we're only college bound, that now we forgot about the trades. And we have a lot of young brothers and sisters who've never driven a nail through a piece of wood with a hammer, have no skills with their hands. So we've pushed back so far one way that we've negatively impacted our communities in terms of opportunities that we should have access to. We can talk about the union piece. I've seen the tests, and I looked at some of the tests for some of the unions. I was a math teacher, and I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna have a lot of students that are gonna struggle with that. Because you gotta do a number of fractions and problems really, really quickly. And I said, that's real hard. So what are we doing in terms of schools of preparing, but also, what are we doing to prep our children for learning? And I'm not trying to sound political. I mean, I know we're doing the city is pushing for the promotion of pre-K and everything but we have to teach our folks in our communities to get our kids in school. Know what grade has the lowest daily attendance rate every day? Kindergarten. People don't take their kids to school every day. We have pre-K, we're paying for it, and we have to call parents, can you please send your child to this quality pre-K center that we're paying for? But we got a waiting list, so if you don't take advantage of it, we got another family that's waiting to take that seat. And if you don't set the table for learning to make sure, so whether you're going into a trade, because we need good black and brown carpenters, we need good black and brown plumbers. So that way, if we really want to build a community, we can't build a community of just college graduates, because now who's doing some of the other work? There are a lot of plumbers that own houses down the shore, and I'm not saying that's your goal, but it is a way to gain wealth. And we need to start talking about wealth within our community.
One thing I'll add really quickly, this is Kristen on the career and technical education piece. The high school completion rates are much higher for students in CTE programs. So these are kids who are highly motivated to finish. They know that they have certifications and skills. And I'm thinking about a visit I had to Randolph a couple of years ago where I talked to the great welding teacher there. I think I visited him maybe in February of the school year. He had 6 students in his welding program, 6 seniors in the welding program, and they all had guaranteed jobs after graduation, starting at $40,000, $50,000. Not bad for an 18-year-old. So it's definitely a career path that we need to be. Right. Didn't count overtime, double time. Those are really valid career paths.
Thanks, Kristen. We're going to go over here to this gentleman.
Yeah, my name is Kevin Cook. I'm a parent of a 9th grader at Cheltenham. Freshman, and I look back at that town hall meeting we had last year after the incident occurred, and I think we probably wouldn't be here now if that didn't happen. So it's as bad as it was, I think some good is going to come out of it, and I was kind of glad to say it happened, but something needed to happen, I guess, to spur this interaction. My question for you, Doctor, is in Cheltenham, you just recently talked about how it's disparity of African American teachers compared to students. And I know it's not easy to flip that, but is there a plan to bring in, or how do you bring in more African American teachers while having such a foundation of teachers who've been there for a number of years, who are part of the mainstay and are probably doing a good job? But I went to HBCU, I went to Northeast High School, and didn't see really African American teachers till I got to college. How do we change that landscape, in the short period of time, or is there a long-term plan for that?
Thank you. Great question. I want to say first that there is a national teacher crisis in terms of educators going into the field. You unpack that data, and then you realize that the number is even that much smaller for individuals of color who are going into the profession. But it also, the root cause, it speaks to, how do people of color feel or felt when they were going through the school system? And are they willing to go back to that? And many are saying no and pursuing other areas. What we've tried to do at Cheltenham the last couple of years is be extremely deliberate about our hiring process with regards to the identification and the recruitment of teachers of color. Everyone is fighting to find that highly qualified candidate of color. So what we did, working through the Office of Curriculum and Instruction and the HR department, was we did a really aggressive outreach. And we sent our information to HBCUs everywhere to say, we're looking for individuals who are truly committed and love children and want to be an agent of change. We'd love to welcome you to Cheltenham. We were very deliberate with respect to going to the traditional college fairs and trying to bring our teachers of color to those fairs to say, help us identify, help recruit, talk about the stories of the great things happening in our district. Through the screening process, what we were finding are unintentional roadblocks in terms of which applicants get through the preliminary screening process. So we saw a lot of applicants applying, very few getting interviews. And we questioned ourselves about why that was happening, what were the criteria we were using, and we felt that there was an area where we were missing a lot of candidates and wasn't giving that opportunity. So we opened up that pool, and we involved everyone. It wasn't just the HR department. So when there were positions, the curriculum team, the principals, HR got together and screened every single application. So you don't leave it to one or two individuals to determine who gets an interview. So we're extremely excited, and we saw significant improvements because this cohort that we brought into Cheltenham for the 17-18 school year was the most diverse group. Over 51% of the candidates that were educators this year were candidates of color, which was unprecedented in terms of that number. So I think it is extremely deliberate and intentional. It is grassroots. It is going to our churches, our places of worship, and saying, help us spread the word. And we want to give people a shot. You apply, you have the credentials, we're going to give you a shot. Where before people weren't getting a shot to have a conversation with us.
Thanks, Dr. Marseille. We just want to, and you can certainly give him a hand if you want to do that.
I'll take it.
Okay, all right. We want to encourage some really concise questions and some concise answers so we can get to everybody that's lined up, because we got a lot of people and we only have until 8 o'clock at this point, and it is 7:37. So, sir, please go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, good evening. My name is Olaniyan Adifumi. I work for the School Board of Philadelphia as a substitute teacher. I have both a question and an answer. Who, and hopefully this doesn't take us in the wrong direction, but who writes the books, the textbooks that the students can take home or don't take home? And is it possible for us to have people who come from our community and who went to places like, which I went to, Cheney University? Can we write the math books and tell them about the X, Y, and Z planes when we tell them about the Pythagorean theorem or the Egyptian pyramids? So who writes the books?
Thank you. Okay, nobody's answering. One thing, I
can answer. I'm just afraid I might take too long.
You can go ahead. I mean, there are a number of, you can get into from a superintendent's lens, and I'll also go from there are a number of book companies and publishers that a lot of districts use regularly. I always say it's also on the teacher to make sure you supplement with the truth. So if you have to use a textbook and you don't agree with everything in that textbook, supplement with the truth. There's nothing that says that you can't do that. So I'm always concerned when the teacher says, oh, I don't trust this, I don't like this textbook. And I'm like, is that the only tool you're using? Then something's wrong. Supplement the textbook, and then you can actually, now you're actually pushing, because as long as you know what your standards are, that you have to make sure, and the skills that those students need to learn, then you can supplement. So there's nothing saying that you are stuck to the textbook. So if you know the content, you know what the skills that they're required to learn, because that shouldn't change. You just make sure you supplement with the truth, and you make sure they learn what they're supposed to learn, the content that they need, and the skills that they're supposed to acquire.
Thank you. Okay, I hope that we not only can supplement the textbooks, but write our own textbooks too. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Vera McBride. I'm a grandmother of a freshman in Cheltenham Township. And what I'm noticing is, like one of the people on the panel said, that there's no, the parents or the people that are in charge of the children don't have access to the school. And it's a timeline. Granted, it's the report card period. That's the only time the school seems to be open to a forum such as this. Parent-Teachers Association was something that I grew up with when I was coming up in school. So why can't a Parent-Teacher Association meeting be held in the evening where we can have forums like this, where you can have the actual parents in a forum in a setting like this, voicing their opinions. Granted, maybe you should get their opinions prior to the meeting, and then be a panel such as yourself able to address their concerns. Because I hear a lot of things going on here this evening, but a lot of the things that I'm hearing are not addressing the systematic problems that exist, and that's parents being able to communicate their desires and their needs to people such as yourself, to make a change in a timely manner.
Okay.
Dr. Marseille? She says Cheltenham.
Recommendations well noted. I think that what we haven't done really well is create those particular opportunities. Oftentimes we lock ourselves into these particular areas where this is what's good for the system and this is when we can meet, as opposed to thinking about, well, what's good for parents and how do we better address the needs of our clientele. The same way we think we don't do a great service in terms of thinking, well, this is about children. And if it's about children, then they should come first, and then we work out the details later. So we are working to make sure that we work much more deliberately in creating that. The conversation around back to school night or parent conferences where they're limited to a certain window that by default eliminates a significant number of the population. Students who have parents who have 2 or 3 jobs who can't do that. And as I think about my mother and her 2 jobs, there was no way she was going to make a evening event because she was always working. So we do have to be more creative in finding ways to meet parents where they're at in terms of the idea about engagement. Because I think the concern I always have is when people say, well, parents are not engaged. And I said, well, tell me what you mean by that. The current structure makes it extremely difficult for them to be engaged because you're not thinking critically about their needs as well.
One issue that we are going to do this year in partnership with Dr. Marseille, as they are identifying young people for the SAT prep program, then Marshall, myself, Salem, Enon, we are reaching out concomitantly to all of the parents of all the children that are being identified to create a new conversation around what does parenting look like while your child is going through this particular program, and looking for some new ways to both meet with parents and give parents access to information. So that is a $30,000 grant that's put together by these 2 churches, and we're also going to be reaching out to the parents in partnership with the administration to create a new safe space for parents to have conversation, to understand their role in the process of the development of their children.
Sharif, how do you do that at Mastery? Mastery is a charter school, it's a little different. How do you do that at Mastery, make it so that the parents have access?
I think one, it's, as educators, we have to come in with the right mindset. And so if you come in and you're parachuting in someone else's community and not being there to serve, then you're basically setting up a colonial system in other people's neighborhoods. And so the first thing is like having the right mindset. And so, and listening to families. So one of the things we heard from families like, hey, we used to have our report card conferences across 2 days and different times. And now we have what we don't necessarily call them report card conferences, we call them one-on-one conferences, and they're scheduled throughout the day. So we give up a day of instruction because what we gain back accelerates achievement in other ways. So all day long, families are coming in, they sign up for the days that they can come. And we're a 7 to 12 school, and there's a narrative out there that says, oh, as they get older, parents are less involved. Our highest attending conferences are with our juniors and seniors. And so it just goes to show that, like, there's a lot of false narratives out there around our families. Back to school night, we still call it back to school night out of habit, but we have 3 in the day. 1 at 8, 1 at 12, 1 at 6. We are there to serve, and if we don't come in there with that mindset, we will continue to have those same issues in partnering with our families.
Brother, excuse me, one quick question. Brother Almeki, could you also have anything to say about recruiting teachers of color?
I'm so glad you asked.
I know
sir.
you have some expertise in that. Yes.
Come up here, sir. So this is how you recruit diverse candidates. You talk to young men like Tamir Harper, who's going to be a superintendent one day, which means he has to be a teacher one day, right? So we started an organization, the Fellowship, Black Male Educators for Social Justice, because we believe that not having this disparity in our schools is an injustice. And don't let, again, back to narratives, there was a time there were plenty of black teachers. And when you look at the time in the South, there were over 4,000 schools serving black children filled with black educators. And when you look at the illiteracy rate right after the emancipation, 90%, 95%, and by 1910 it had dropped to 30%. Why? So many black educators. We're having a convening October 13th through the 15th. If you go on our website, 1,000, the number 1,000 times 2025, because we believe in transparent goal setting, 1,000 black male educators by the year 2025. We are unapologetic about it. We hold ourselves accountable for that, and we want the community to also hold us accountable for that.
Thank you.
Two concise questions. To Christian, did you ever consider that the reason Vaux is now getting all that money is because Blumberg is not there anymore and the neighborhood is gentrifying? To the two administrators, what is being done to make sure that so-called integrated schools are really integrated, meaning that the representation of blacks in AP would be better, and the overrepresentation of blacks in special ed would be dealt with as well?
Ms.
So,
Graham?
to answer your question, sir, I mean, you're right. You can't have a conversation about Vaux without talking about what Sharswood Blumberg has lost, and they've lost a lot. One thing that the school really has done is to make sure that the kids who are receiving the benefit of all this extra money are kids who live in the neighborhood. They're not, looking for kids from outside, and these are kids who live there. So that's something.
Dr. Marseille.
Yes, thank you. Several things that we're trying to do in terms of breaking down the systemic barriers that prevent students from gaining that access. What we're very deliberate about is the idea that the data, to some extent, is very clear that we have high-achieving students who, for multiple reasons, are not being steered into higher level courses. There's a tremendous disproportionality, and we have to ask ourselves what criteria are using and who are the individuals who are identifying and making those decisions. We've opened up that door to make sure that there's not a single or two people sitting in a room thinking about this is why this particular student should be there. There's no reason why a student who has demonstrated far beyond mastery, who's taken the PSATs, who's shown by College Board to have high potential for access to honors and AP level courses, then to be told, maybe you're not ready for that. Yeah, I know what your scores say, but maybe it's too hard. Take college prep. Get ready for that first. So we're breaking those barriers in terms of who are the people in the room making those decisions and those criteria. We're also looking at the way, and someone talked about it, is the fact that Caucasian students are 9 to 10 times more likely to be identified as gifted than students of color. And when you look at the criteria and who are making those decisions, there's not a level of diversity in the criteria and in that particular room. There's also a challenge that we are facing is the significant disproportion of students of color who identified as special education. And part of that is not having meaningful, deliberate, research-based interventions that provide support for those students before someone triggers that. And I have absolutely no problem with a student having needs that may need to go into a special education realm, but that is not a default. Wagner struggling in algebra and not being able to do algebra should not equal, well, let's get Wagner tested. And then on top of that, let's find some reason to make that individual special education. Not that there's anything wrong with those services, but we're seeing a disproportionate number of that. So we are thinking about the system in terms of breaking down those barriers and saying, we're not going to do that anymore. What are the interventions? And then we have to talk about the educational piece. What are the implicit biases that exist that would lead you to make that recommendation about particular subgroups of students?
Thank you. We have 9 minutes, correct? Yeah.
No, we're gonna go over to this side and then we're gonna come back to the middle. Go ahead, ma'am.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Katherine Blount. I am a retired principal. I was the principal of Parkway Center City High School, and I was in the district for 43 years. I heard some good things tonight, and I want to have a courageous conversation about race, which I know can't take place right now, but I'm asking Pastor Waller to reconvene another session in which we talk about gentrification in Philly and the impact that that is having on the communities of color, particularly African American communities. That's number one. Also, how that is impacting the schools, you know, in these communities, some of which are being left behind, others of which, you know, are being changed in order to accommodate the influx of Caucasian children into certain areas. All right, this is a very important conversation that we have to have, because when you drill down beneath the surface of the school district of Philadelphia, you will see such unbelievable discrimination, even with people of color at the top, that you would not believe. So would you please think about convening another session like this one, but this time we talk about gentrification of schools and of the city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Everybody's going to respond to that. I'll probably follow up similarly. My name is Erin Trent Johnson. I'm a racial equity coach. I coach and train teachers and leaders, district leaders, funders in education around issues of racial equity at every level, at the classroom level, at the hiring level, the recruitment level. I've worked with Brother Sharif for many years and worked with families, specifically around issues of equity. And I've seen the same patterns across the country as I do here in Philadelphia with other schools and organizations that I work with in terms of the inability or the unwillingness to really name white supremacy as the root cause of the inequities that live at every level, at the funding level, right? When we talk about inequitable funding, we need to then go up to, or go down to, systemic racism. And I think this is a question for everyone on the panel. Really, and I've worked with Dr. Stevenson as well, deeply on this work, is if we break down at the leadership level and really having this conversation, the barriers for all of us, for people of color, for white folks in leadership, are shame and fear. And they keep us from naming entrenched white supremacy as the issue, so then we can't actually have a legitimate conversation about it. Like the sister said earlier, a real courageous conversation. And so I want to know at every level, and for everyone here, or whoever feels comfortable in answering, what do you need from the community? What do you need to have that actual conversation at a systems level and at an individual level as well?
Anyone on the panel? Ms. McFadden?
I think one of the things we do need to do is constantly have conversations. We need to bring parents in, and we need to share with them information about how we want the best for their students, particularly when you're in a school with predominantly Black African American children. And then we need to take away the shame and fear of being Black. And then we also have these, we need to talk to teachers about really getting down to the cultural competencies. Because you can't have a conversation about race if you're not going to teach the truth in the classroom. So we need to make sure, going back to that parent, when I'm teaching my content, right, and I hate teaching Shakespeare. I hate teaching the canon. And I know I probably, a lot of people are saying, oh God. No, but because I feel like there's an African American canon that's so untapped, that we have so many stories that are similar, and we don't teach them. So I always go across the line, and I say, I get, but see, Shakespeare, we were told Shakespeare was good. I find nothing good about Shakespeare because it's all dysfunctional. So I don't want to read his dysfunctional story. I want to read another dysfunctional story with a character like my grandmother, or a character like my aunt, or a character like me, because then I think once we start having these conversations about race, then we can feel the redemption. We need to redeem ourselves. We need to tell our children, you are enough. You are divine. But as long as we continue to have this 90% white teachers and 86% Black students, and then the only time, we get 28 days to celebrate African American history, and then they accept Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, every now and then Malcolm X, maybe a little bit of Marcus Garvey, and Harriet Tubman. Oh, Harriet. Can't forget about Harriet. But then we have a plethora of others. But we only have 28 days, but that's not true. We have 365 days. So once you start having them courageous conversations, then I will say, what are you doing at home? How come I have all these children who tell me they don't like to read? How many of you are getting magazines coming at home and sharing them with your students? How many women are still having Essence come to their house? How many families are still getting Ebony? How? What are you doing? What are you doing to support it? That's all I want to know.
Yeah. Okay, we have, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Solomon. Thank you, panel. My question really is to Dr. Marseille. I'm interested, I'm a newly transitioned resident of Cheltenham, and been hearing this conversation about Philadelphia public schools for a long time. So fortunately, you guys really talking to the choir about that. But I'm interested in Cheltenham School District's perspective on this issue of race, because I plan to certainly contact you so we can talk further, but if I'm understanding that, is this something new to Cheltenham School District around race? If, in fact, it's following through the percentages of Black and brown children now being larger than the white student, is there something that's all of a sudden happened in Cheltenham District that you're experiencing, that you're working on? Or has this been going on for a long time that we're just learning because of this incident starts to come to the forefront? Thank you.
Yeah. Great question. And if it's the last, great question. So let me share with you this, that I am deeply rooted in data analysis and looking at the data as one piece of the puzzle, right? Because I don't want that to be a single story, because there's other elements. And my concern with the incident of May 3rd was that somehow that created a swell for advocacy around individuals who use that as a lightning rod to espouse some really racially divisive rhetoric. And it hurt me. Though Cheltenham, I believe, has its unique set of challenges like every single community. And I think this is the conversation that when we first started talking about is the complexity of a diverse community. And what does that really mean? And are you willing to live up to those particular creeds and those ethos? So when you are, the data suggests that we have, for quite some time, marginalized a large group of students for years in terms of educational outcomes. And some people don't like to hear that because they think that I somehow am blaming them for that. I'm saying that there's a realization that there are some students who are succeeding, others who are not. There are systemic barriers that oftentimes prevent students from gaining the access. There are some practices that are deliberate in terms of saying, if you look like this, you're more likely to be in this course. So the racial complexity, the issue of equity, was happening long before May 3rd. And May 3rd was an incident where students who were struggling with how they were feeling engaged in an activity where they felt that physical activity was the only way to resolve that. That became then the poster child of Cheltenham School District. People then sending me emails telling me, when am I going to get rid of the animals in the district? People sending correspondence via social media saying, this is what happens when brown people move into a community. This is what happens when parents don't care about their children or don't care about education, right? So it's deeply rooted in those particular fibers. And it's deeply rooted in the fact that, unintentionally, I'll say that, there are systems that have been created to divide. And for me as superintendent of schools, it is about breaking down those systemic barriers and gaining access. It's also significantly changing the mindset of individuals who educate our children. And when I'm talking about individuals who educate our children, I think Dr. Brown made that reference, it is everyone. It is the bus driver who greets that student at the door. It is the safety officer who is in the hallway. It is the cafeteria and the recess aide in terms of how they are receiving our children. And in that conversation we had about care and loving our kids. So this is not new. This incident should not have sparked the conversation that should have been happening. And with the other parent who talked about what can we do as a community, for me, it's really about advocacy. If you're not at the table, you're what's for dinner. And I've tried to express to my parents that, A, get out to your school board meetings, all right? I don't mind that you come up there for 5 minutes and say bad things about me. That's your point to advocate. Get up and say those 5 minutes that you have, that we give you to talk about your concerns. And push the superintendent and the school board to make meaningful policy changes in the way in which conducts our behavior and our attitudes about our particular students. So for me, it's a long-standing conversation that is embedded in data that goes back 15 years and even longer with regards to that process.
Thank you, Dr. Marseille. Now, we are already over time, and so I want to apologize in advance to those who are still waiting to ask questions.
They can come back to the next session.
We have 5 people left, so I want to just quickly give you a chance to ask your question, sir. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Ishmael Jimenez. I am a school district of Philadelphia teacher. I've been a teacher for the last 9 years. I teach African American history, and I'm also co-founder of the Philadelphia Black History Collaborative. My main question, especially for Otis Hackney and for Reverend Waller, in what way are you guys using your political muscle to advance truly authentic dialogue that involves practitioners who have been doing this work on the ground in real ways and elevating their voices over the power structure that controls Philadelphia already for the last 30 years?
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, Otis.
Yes, no, I'm ready to, I have to figure out that answer for that one. In terms of, and when I say that, giving a thoughtful answer to a meaningful question. How I use my position in terms of the work that I do is in terms of elevating those conversations, part of it is first is just setting the example. As a former teacher, as a former building leader, now chief education officer of the city, who was just a kid from 56th Street in West Philly, every time I get an opportunity to talk, I try to promote that story and tell them that when you see that little brown boy sitting in the back corner of your classroom, you need to look at him or young woman as an asset model, from an asset model versus a deficit model, because you don't know what that young person will turn out to be.
That's right.
Because I was a really bad student, y'all. I raised a lot of cane in the classroom. And, but the other piece is, how do we bring people to the table to have those conversations? I know that the mayor meets with principals on a regular basis, and we talk about those things. We're looking to expand those conversations with teachers and also with assistant superintendents. We're looking to do that so that way that voice is part of the conversation around how do we deal with these complex issues within education, and not just with the resources that are required, but the preparation. I am a huge fan in terms of supporting Sharif and his work with how do we get more of our young people to pursue education, and agree that even though I may be very challenging or challenge teachers all the time, when people ask me, I said, that's the best job I ever had. I love the job that I do, but being a teacher is the best job, my favorite job, and I joke about my wife, that might be the job where I retire as a teacher, when I'm finally done with this phase of my life and this work. And so how do we make sure we can do that? And with that is looking at the teacher, when I say teacher preparation programs, when I encounter young people who are struggling to pass a praxis test, and I'm concerned about that, especially when it's the math session, because then it really makes me angry, and they say, well, should we need an alternative route? I say, yeah, to an extent, but eventually you're going to be in a classroom and you want your students to be able to learn how to study, prepare, and pass a test, because they're always going to have to take some type of a test, and if you as an educator needs to make sure that you can study and prepare and pass a test. We can't take that piece out of the equation here. So we're working on doing those things, but for me it is a lot of work of leading by example and supporting initiatives like Sharif, what he's doing and being available whenever needed or whenever called.
Pastor Waller.
Pastor Waller.
Thank you. I would like to think that the way I'm using my power is, number one, staying excellent and accessible, doing what I do at a high level, but also remaining connected to other groups, advocate groups, so that we're saying the same thing. Number two, I'm using my access in the room to make sure that I am representing in the room what some of the voices on the streets are saying. You can't have a movement without King and X in the street, and also Adam Clayton Powell in the room. And so I'd like to think that I share the sentiments of my brothers in Black Lives, or my sisters in Black Lives Matter, but I have access to a room that can lift up what the voices are saying. And then finally, creating opportunities for us all to come together, using what God has given so that we can have these conversations. And so I think, to the extent that we stay excellent and do what we do at a high level and accessible to other groups, and that I use the opportunities that I have to be in the room to lift up what's being said in the street, to lift up what's being said here. I view it as a charge to me that our sister challenged me to have another one that deals with gentrification and race and how that has implications for public funding. And so we heard it in front of her. If this doesn't happen within the next 6 months, then I have failed what the community has suggested needs to happen. But Sara is going to make sure that it happens with WURD. Amen. Those are the three things that I would like to think, and whether I'm doing it or not is left up to the community to say yes or no.
All right, thank you, Pastor. We got 6 minutes. 6 minutes. 6 minutes, okay. We got, what, 1, 2, 3, 4. So very quickly, please, sir. Go ahead.
My name is Robert Mitchell. I went to Cheltenham High School, graduated in '94. The events that happened really disturbed me. I drove an hour plus to come here just to ask Dr. Marseille this question. Because as a young black man in Cheltenham School District, I was told, oh, you're black, you must live in the gardens. You're black, you're not supposed to be that highly educated. I had a 3.5 GPA. I was in student council. I was in an African American Student League, Future Business Leaders of America. My question to you is very simple. What are you doing to ensure that the teachers in that school, the ones who've been there for 20, 30 years, what are you doing to make sure that they just don't have cultural diversity training, but cultural competency training? That's why I didn't move my kids into this district for that reason.
Yeah.
I moved them somewhere else.
Well, let me share with you our ongoing commitment towards that. And I shared that change requires not just programmatic change, but cultural shifts as well. And we've invested a tremendous amount of time and resource into the professional learning experiences that our educators are receiving. I mentioned earlier that it is not an option in terms of that process. So we have individuals, Dr. Stevenson, who is leading conversations throughout the year around racial literacy. We have Dr. Alyn Michael, who's been working with the district and working with our teachers around whiteness and identity and what that means as a teacher and your impact on schooling. We have Dr. Barbara Moore Williams, who's worked for years in the Philadelphia School District, retired, who is doing this work on cultural competency. So part of that is a really courageous conversation during our professional development opportunities we have for teachers about that terminology about implicit bias. How does my implicit bias may impact the way in which I engage with students? And to your point, the idea about that, the bigotry of low expectations in terms of that process and how we have to break that down. But I said earlier, it's about oftentimes change is extremely difficult. Everyone wants it, but very few people want to change. They want change, but don't want to change. And we're trying to get at those courageous conversations saying, yes, there are structural things we have to change to create a better climate, but there are also things within the classroom setting and the relationship that's formed between teacher or educator and student that is paramount in building and fostering those relationships and knocking down those implicit bias. So we've been very deliberate, and the board has been very deliberate in creating policies that help support that, where it doesn't become an option as a choice where I'll decide to take this because it's interesting. No, it is the fabric of the work we do, and it represents the diversity of our students and why more professional development and training is needed.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Natasha Patterson. I am also an alum of Cheltenham High School, and I also grew up in the gardens, and I was also discriminated against for growing up in the gardens with my single mama, but today I stand here as the Dean of Health Sciences at Montgomery County Community College. And so opposite of what my white male counselor told me when he did not help me do my applications for college, I had to find the only black female counselor who was not assigned to me to help me fill out my applications and financial aid and everything for college. Having that history, I would love to give back. And my question is, how do alumni get involved with the students that are currently at Cheltenham High School on an official level? I unofficially mentor students. I have friends who have children in the district who call on me all the time when they need advice and they want me to talk to their children. They want me to take them to colleges and give them tours and talk to them about getting into college and things like that. I would love to spread that out. And I'm a part of a few civic organizations who do mentoring, who give out scholarships every year, and I would love to bring that to Cheltenham High School. I'm currently on the health advisory board for the health careers at Martin Luther King High School, but I would love to give back to my own high school that I graduated from. So please tell me how.
Thank you very much. before we leave, let's make sure you and I talk and we get your contact information. Someone said earlier that it's unfortunate that an incident occurred for us to have this conversation or to engage that, where I find opportunity in some of the struggle. And the fact that so many educators, so many adults have come to our offices and my office and Dr. Smith, who's in the audience, our assistant superintendent, to say, how can we support Cheltenham? We want to give back. We've lived in the district. We no longer in the district. We came back. My parents were here. Whatever their story was, they had a connection to Cheltenham. What we've been working with University of Pennsylvania and Dr. Peterson is collecting those names and being very strategic about how we use those individuals and where they go. Those who are extremely interested, please reach out to my office or the assistant superintendent's office, because the term that we're using earlier when we said it takes a village, it's phenomenal the number of people that have come out and said, put me to work. What can I do? Both on a volunteer basis and some highly decorated professionals who do this work on a national level, who said, I can be of service, how can we do that? So we're taking individuals who are willing to put the time in to invest in our children, and we're willing to try to find a mechanism without going through, obviously the crazy volunteering thing is hard, because you have to fill out 650 forms before you actually get to walk into the building, which is another barrier. But we're gonna try to help people navigate that, because we do want the expertise. It's extremely important. Where's the young lady? Did she leave? Thank you. Our students need to see that. They need to see you. Because you shared a story that is identical to my experience. At Princeton High School, though I had a great experience and I appreciate my community, my counselor told me, listen, not everyone can go to college. Maybe you should find something like a trade. I have no problem with that. Those are great experiences. That's not what I wanted to do. I was like, well, help me get into college. You're not ready for that, and you're a sophomore right now, and the way your grades are going, slim and none, Marseille, all right? And whoever thought that I'd be sitting in a room where Dr. Peterson's the chair of my dissertation committee, and I graduate from University of Pennsylvania, when people said you couldn't do that. So people need to see success stories, because they've seen too many of the opposite. And the images that some of us talked about earlier, about too many images of our people not making it, because that's what oftentimes, I apologize, media tends to portray. That's what people pay attention to. So we love to have you and others connect to that work and reach out to us. So I'll make sure you and I have a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Marseille. I know we have a couple more questions. We're going to have to get to them after the event. I want to thank everybody for coming out. I want to thank the panel here, Sharif El-Mekki, Principal of Mastery Shoemaker, Tamir Harper, student at SLA, Eric Shamari Grimes, who is an educator as well as a radio talk show host, and Hillary Beard, who is a writer, and Gwen Ebron, who is a counselor. I want to thank all of you, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Stevenson.
Thank you very much, Solomon, and I would like to thank my panel. As you've all been recognized, you see us up there for your wonderful commentary. And I would also like to make an announcement before we congratulate both panels, that if you're interested in the question around preschool expulsion and racial disproportionality, that on October 19th, the Constance Clayton lecture will be given by Walter Gilliam, who is the leading authority on these issues. And it's about what happens in the classroom and what happens in the relationship between teachers and students and how implicit bias plays a role. So it'll be held at Penn, October 19th, 4:30. You're all invited. It's free. If you're interested in that, in more conversation about that. Could we give a round of applause to our panelists? Thank you very much. And thanks to WURD for having this conversation and others to come. Thank you very much. We're done.